Picture this. You're sitting in an office, and it's 7:30 in the morning. The lights are barely on. Most people won't even show up for another hour. But you're already there, coffee in hand, laptop open, ready to go. You stayed late last night. You answered emails on your phone at 11 p.m. You skipped lunch twice this week. You've been doing this for 2 years. You believe in the work. You actually care, and everyone around you can see it. Now picture someone else in that same office. They walk in right at 9. They take a full lunch break. They leave on time. They don't panic when something goes wrong. They don't stay late unless they absolutely have to. And when there's a layoff, when the company decides to cut headcount and let people go, they don't get touched. You do. That's what today is about. That exact gut punch moment when you realize that working harder didn't protect you. It didn't buy you loyalty. It didn't guarantee anything. And somewhere deep in your chest, you feel something that's hard to explain because it's not just frustration. It's confusion. It feels like the rules you were following your whole life just turn out to be wrong. This is called lazy people never get fired. And before you click away thinking this is some joke or motivational gimmick, I want you to hear me out. Because what we're about to talk about is real. It happens in offices and companies all over the world every single day. And once you understand why it happens, you'll never look at work or job security the same way again. The hard worker burns out because they said yes to everything. Every extra project, every weekend request, every "can you just quickly handle this?" They absorbed all of it. Over time, that pile doesn't just grow. It starts to define them. They become the person who does everything. And the dangerous part of being the person who does everything is that it's not actually a safe position. It looks safe on the outside, but what it really means is that you're running on fumes while someone else is running on strategy. Burnout isn't dramatic. It doesn't show up like a car crash. It shows up like a slow leak. You start missing small things. Your quality dips. Your attitude shifts. You get tired in ways sleep doesn't fix. And then, one day, the company that watched you pour everything into your job decides you're not as sharp as you used to be. And they let you go. That's the hidden trap of looking productive instead of being productive. You spend your energy performing effort instead of creating value. You're busy every single hour, but you're not necessarily moving anything forward. And the cruel irony is that nobody sits down and tells you this. Nobody hands you a manual that says, "Hey, the way you're doing this is going to cost you." So you keep going. You keep grinding. And the lean stays ahead of you. The lazy employee, the one we're going to spend this video examining, figured something out that the hard worker hasn't. They figured out that energy is not unlimited, and that how you spend it matters more than how much of it you spend. They're not lazy in the way people think. They're not sleeping at their desk or avoiding their responsibilities. They're strategic. They're protecting something. And what they're protecting is the most valuable resource they have, their capacity to keep going. This is where the story starts. Not with a lazy person, but with a hard worker doing everything and slowly running out of road. Here's the thing about someone who refuses to waste their time. They're not actually refusing to work. They're refusing to work on things that don't matter. There's a big difference between those two statements, and most people spend their entire careers confusing them. The so-called lazy employee walks into the office and immediately starts asking a question that the hard worker almost never asks. Does this actually need to be done? Is this needed for the result to be reached? That question is more powerful than it sounds, because when you start asking honestly, you realize that a significant portion of a normal workday is made up of tasks that exist not because they produce results, but because they've always existed. Reports that nobody reads, meetings that could have been emails, processes that were designed 10 years ago for a problem that no longer exists. Busy work that gets inherited from one team to the next like an old piece of furniture nobody wants, but nobody wants to throw out either. The efficient worker, and that's really what we're talking about when we say lazy, sees that furniture and puts it on the curb. They don't perform the ritual of doing work for the sake of doing work. They trace every task back to a real outcome, and if it doesn't connect, they either find a way to eliminate it, delegate it, or automate it. And automation is where this gets interesting, Because there's a version of laziness that is genuinely valuable, and it lives inside the act of building systems. When someone spends 3 hours creating a spreadsheet template that will save 30 minutes every single week for the next 2 years, that's not laziness. That's a return on investment. That's thinking like someone who understands leverage. The shortcut seeker isn't cutting corners on quality. They're cutting corners on friction. There's a massive difference. Cutting quality means delivering something worse. Cutting friction means delivering something faster, with less pain, and with more consistency. One destroys value. The other creates it. Think about how this plays out in real life. 2 employees are given the same task: generate a weekly summary report for the team. The first employee does it manually every week. Opens the spreadsheet, copies the numbers, formats the doc, pastes it into an email, sends it. 45 minutes every Friday. The second employee spends 2 hours on a Monday building a template that auto-pulls the numbers and formats itself. Every Friday, it takes them 5 minutes. Over a year, the second employee saves over 30 hours. And the quality of their report is more consistent because human error gets removed from the equation. Which one looks lazier on a Tuesday? The second one. Which one is actually smarter? Also the second one. This is the reframe that changes everything. Laziness in the workplace isn't about effort. It's about efficiency. It isn't about doing less. It's about doing only what matters and finding the fastest, most reliable path to the result. The people who operate this way don't run out of steam by Thursday. They don't hit walls on big projects. They have reserves, and those reserves show up exactly when they're needed most. Let's talk about something that nobody tells you when you're starting out in your career. Most workplaces don't actually pay for effort. They pay for outcomes. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud. Of course they pay for outcomes. What else would they pay for? But watch how people actually behave at work, and you'll see something different. You'll see people staying visible, staying busy, making sure the boss sees them in the office early and watches them leave late. You'll see people filling their calendar with meetings to signal engagement. You'll see people sending long, detailed update emails, not because the update matters, but because the email proves they were working. None of that is outcome. All of it is performance. The strategic employee, our so-called lazy one, doesn't play that game. They've decoded the difference between effort and value, and they've made a decision to focus entirely on value. They understand that what their employer actually needs, underneath all the meetings and reports and check-ins, is a result, a problem solved, a number moved, a client kept. And here's where it gets counterintuitive. Producing a result in 3 hours is worth more than producing the same result in 10 hours, even though the person who spent 10 hours looks more dedicated. Because the person who did it in 3 hours has 7 hours left. 7 hours they can spend on the next result, or on thinking carefully, or on building something that creates even more value next month. Time in a workplace is not just currency, it's compounding. The employee who learns to protect their time and convert it directly into outcomes is quietly building a track record that looks simple on the surface, but is incredibly hard to argue with. At review time, nobody asks how many hours you logged. They look at what got done. Did revenue go up? Was the project sent out on time? Did the client renew? Those are the things that determine your value, and none of them require you to look busy doing them. There's also something important happening on the perception side of this. When you're always running, always stressed, always at maximum capacity, people start to wonder if you can actually handle more. Stress and overload has a look, and the look of someone barely keeping their head above water doesn't inspire confidence in leadership. It inspires concern. Sometimes it inspires pity. The person who delivers results calmly, consistently, without the drama of visible effort. That person looks like they have capacity. They look like they could take on more. They look like someone you'd want on a harder problem. And because they look that way, they get offered harder problems, bigger projects, and more interesting work. They move up not by grinding loudly, but by delivering quietly. Effort is what you give. Value is what they get. Those two things aren't always the same size. And the worker who understands that distinction is the one who builds something lasting. There's a type of employee that almost every manager quietly values above everyone else. And it's not the loudest one or the most energetic one. It's the calm one. Calm sounds boring when you describe it. It doesn't make a great highlight reel. But in the actual day-to-day reality of a workplace, especially a workplace under pressure, calm is one of the rarest and most valuable things you can bring to a room. Here's what happens when things go wrong at work, because things always go wrong. A client disappears. A launch gets delayed. A budget gets cut in half. Something breaks right before the deadline. In that moment, the room fills up with a very specific kind of energy: panic, blame, scrambling, loud thinking, people competing to be seen as the one who cares most by reacting the hardest. And then there's one person who doesn't do any of that. They sit there. They ask one or two clarifying questions. They say something like, "Okay, so what's the actual problem we need to solve right now?" And because they're not adding noise to the noise, people listen to them. That person isn't checked out. They aren't indifferent. They feel the pressure the same way everyone else does. They've just developed a different relationship with it. They've learned that reacting loudly to a crisis doesn't solve the crisis. It just creates the second problem on top of the first one. The crisis is the first problem. Your team's panic is the second problem. The calm person refuses to become the second problem. This matters for job security in a way that goes beyond the obvious. Because when companies shrink, when hard times come and decisions have to be made about who stays, the people who created stability around them are the ones who get protected. They're the ones whose absence would make things harder. Their calm is a resource the team has come to depend on. You don't cut a resource like that. You cut the noise. You cut the chaos. You keep the stability. There's also a longer game being played here around emotional consistency. The employee who can be counted on to show up the same way every day, not perfectly, but predictably, build something that most people underestimate. They build trust. Not the trust you build by impressing someone once, but the deeper kind of trust that comes from never being a source of drama. Never dropping balls you promised to hold. Never blowing up at the wrong moment. Never making your manager's job harder by becoming a problem they have to manage. Office drama has a cost that most people don't calculate because it's invisible. It costs attention. It costs energy. It costs political capital. Every conflict, every tension, every whisper campaign takes something out of the room that could have gone into the actual work. The calm employee doesn't contribute to that drain. And in a world where management is quietly measuring who makes their life easier, that restraint becomes a competitive advantage. There's a ceiling that almost every hard worker hits, and most of them never figure out why. They work hard. They deliver results. They stay calm under pressure. And yet, at a certain point, they can't grow anymore. They can't get promoted without burning themselves out again. They've hit the wall of personal capacity, the point where there are only so many hours in the day and only so much one person can do alone. The worker who builds systems never hits that ceiling, or at least they hit it a lot later. A system, in this context, isn't complicated. It's just a repeatable process that produces a result without you having to reinvent it every time. It's the template you built once that generates the weekly report automatically. It's the checklist you wrote so that the next person who joins the team can do the onboarding task correctly without asking you 12 questions. It's the folder structure, the naming convention, the workflow that lives in a shared document so that work doesn't live entirely inside your own head. When you build systems, you do two things at once. First, you free yourself from the repetitive part of your job so you can spend your time on the higher level, more interesting, more visible work. Second, you create something that exists beyond you, something the company can use even when you're not there. That second part is what makes you genuinely valuable in a way that's very hard to replace. Think about what it means to be irreplaceable. Most people assume it means being the only one who can do a specific thing, holding knowledge hostage, essentially. But that's actually a fragile version of job security because it depends entirely on you showing up every single day. The moment you get sick or quit or decide you want to do something else, that bottleneck breaks. The person who builds systems creates a different kind of indispensability. They don't just do the work, they build the infrastructure that makes the work possible. They multiply themselves. And multiplying yourself is worth far more than being irreplaceable through hoarding. There's a practical version of this that plays out in layoffs constantly. When a company has to decide who to cut, they're essentially asking, what does this person enable? Not just what do they do, but what stops working if they leave. The person who built the systems, who documented the processes, who created the templates and the workflows, their exit creates a ripple. Their absence has a cost that's easy to calculate and hard to justify absorbing. That calculation protects them. And here's the quiet truth underneath all of this. The person who builds repeatable systems isn't working harder. They're working in a smarter direction. They're front-loading effort to eliminate future effort. They're making a single investment that pays out over and over again, long after the initial work is done. That's not laziness. That's leverage. And leverage is the closest thing to a superpower that a regular employee can actually build. Here's something that's uncomfortable to say out loud, but absolutely true. Workplace survival isn't only about the work. It's also about the politics. Most high-performing employees hate this fact. They believe, genuinely believe, that if they do great work, the results will speak for themselves. That meritocracy is real, that effort gets rewarded, and that whoever produces the most value wins. And sometimes that's true, but more often than people want to admit, it isn't. Because workplaces are made of people, and people aren't purely rational. They have preferences. They have blind spots. They like some people more than others, for reasons that have nothing to do with performance. They protect the people who make them comfortable. The strategic worker, the one we keep calling lazy, figured this out early. And instead of resenting it, they decided to understand it. They pay attention to what their manager actually cares about, not what the official job description says they should care about. Every manager has a public priority list and a real one. The public list is what they say in all-hands meetings. The real list is what they talk about at 4 p.m. on a Friday when the pressure is on. The strategic employee learns the real list fast, and they align their visible work with it. They don't waste time optimizing for things the boss doesn't actually value. They also learn how to be seen without being loud about it. There's a version of visibility that involves showing up to every optional meeting and speaking in every discussion, even when you have nothing to add. And then there's a different version, the kind where you say one precise thing at the right moment, and that one thing lands because it's exactly what was needed. The strategic worker understands the difference. They know that being memorable is more valuable than being present. They know that a well-timed, clearly stated insight does more for their reputation than hours of visible effort ever could. They also understand something about battles. Not every disagreement is worth having. Not every mistake made by someone above you is worth pointing out. Not every bad idea needs to be challenged in the open. The hard worker often can't help themselves. They see something inefficient or wrong, and they feel compelled to fix it loudly, publicly, correctly. The strategic worker makes a different calculation. Is this battle mine to fight? Is the cost of winning this fight lower than the cost of the relationship damage that comes with it? Sometimes the answer is yes. Often it isn't. Workplace politics isn't about being dishonest or fake. At its best, it's just social intelligence. It's knowing your audience. It's understanding what people need from you emotionally, not just professionally. It's knowing when to push and when to absorb. And the person who has time to develop that intelligence, because they're not running at 100% capacity all the time, is the person who navigates it best. There's a version of being good at your job that actually works against you. And understanding it is the difference between feeling secure and actually being secure. Here's the trap. You become excellent at a specific task. You're fast at it, reliable at it, trusted with it. Your manager knows they can hand it to you, and it'll be done perfectly every time. That feels like value. It feels like job security. But what it's actually doing is narrowing you. It's making you the person who does that one thing, and only that one thing. And when the company changes direction, when that one thing gets automated or outsourced or deprioritized, there's nothing underneath it. The strategic employee avoids this trap by constantly asking a different question. Not how do I get better at what I already do, but what does this company need that nobody else is doing? They look for gaps. They look for problems that are just sitting there, unowned, creating friction for everyone, but not assigned to anyone. And they quietly pick those up, not necessarily because they were asked to, but because solving them creates a kind of value that's very different from executing assigned tasks. It creates visibility. It builds a reputation not just for competence, but for initiative, for seeing things that need doing and doing them without being told. Delegation is the other side of this. The strategic worker understands that doing everything yourself is a liability, not an asset. Because if you're the only one who can do something, you can never move past it. You'll be called back to it forever. Every time someone else has a question, you're the answer. Every time the process breaks, you're the fix. You're not growing. You're babysitting a skill you already have. So they delegate deliberately. They teach others what they know. They document it, hand it off, and then move to something harder. This isn't generosity for its own sake, though it often looks that way. It's a calculated move, because every skill you successfully hand off creates room for a more valuable skill to take its place. You keep moving up the ladder of usefulness. You keep making yourself more expensive to lose. The truly hard-to-replace employee isn't the one who knows the most. It's the one whose departure would create the most problems. That's a subtle but critical difference. Knowledge can be transferred. Problems can't always be anticipated. When someone has built enough relationships, enough systems, enough institutional understanding, and enough specialized expertise across multiple areas, their absence doesn't just leave a hole. It leaves a tangle. And companies are very hesitant to walk into a tangle they can see coming. Strategic workers understand that job security isn't given to you by your manager. It's built slowly through a series of deliberate choices about where to focus, what to own, what to hand off, and how to become genuinely difficult to remove without consequences. The worker who never gets fired isn't lazy in the way the word actually means. They're not uncommitted. They're not avoiding responsibility. They're not coasting or hiding or hoping nobody notices them. That version of laziness, the purely avoidant kind, does exist, and it doesn't end well. Nobody is arguing for that. What we've been describing this whole time is something different. It's a person who has understood, at a deep level, that survival in a career is not about how hard you can push. It's about how long you can last. And lasting requires managing yourself differently than most people do. Think about the long game. A career isn't a sprint. It's a 40-year project. And over 40 years, the person who burned white hot for 5 years and then collapsed is going to end up in a very different place than the person who ran at 70% capacity for decades, steadily building, steadily learning, steadily accumulating expertise and relationships and reputation. One of those people had a great 5 years. The other one had a great career. The optimization mindset that underlies all of this isn't really about shortcuts. It's about energy accounting. Every day, you have a finite amount of attention, focus, creativity, and social capital. Where you spend those things determines what you build. The worker who spends them on visible performance rather than actual results depletes fast. The worker who spends them on leverage, on systems, on relationships, on skills that compound, depletes slowly and accumulates simultaneously. And here's the deepest layer of this whole story. The people we've been calling lazy aren't actually avoiding the hard work. They're doing a different kind of hard work. The hard work of thinking clearly about what matters. The hard work of saying no to things that don't. The hard work of building something sustainable instead of something impressive. That kind of work is harder in some ways than just grinding, because grinding doesn't require judgment. Sustainability does. When the layoffs come, and they always come, the question every company is secretly asking about every employee is, does keeping this person make us stronger, or is it just familiar? The hard worker who's burned out, producing declining results, barely holding it together, even though they gave everything. The answer to that question becomes uncomfortable. The strategic worker who's calm, consistent, systemized, politically aware, and continuously building their value. For that person, the answer is obvious. You keep the person who makes the future easier. You let go of the person who represents a cost you can no longer justify. So the real lesson isn't to be lazy. It's to be intentional. It's to understand that your energy is the most valuable thing you bring to work every day. Not your hours, not your stress, not your willingness to suffer. Your energy deployed with precision toward outcomes that actually matter, sustained over years instead of weeks. That's the thing that lazy people figured out. And the hard workers who figure it out too, they don't just survive. They're the last ones standing.